I need to tell you about an investigation that began with a decision I've questioned ever since. My name is Marcus Brennan. I'm a field researcher specializing in remote wilderness documentation, and in September 2024, I led an expedition into a section of Oregon wilderness that's remained largely unexplored due to terrain, difficulty, and access restrictions. We were investigating geological formations, standard survey work, until we discovered an entrance, not a natural cave formation. This was a mineshaft, abandoned, maybe from the 1800s based on the timber framing that was still partially intact. The opening descended at approximately 45 degrees, disappearing into darkness beyond our headlamp range. My team geologist identified rock composition immediately: cinnabar, mercury sulfide ore. The distinctive red coloring was unmistakable, and that identification changed everything. Cinnabar releases mercury vapor, especially in enclosed spaces. The concentrations can cause neurological damage, respiratory failure. Even brief exposure in poorly ventilated mineshafts has caused documented deaths. We had a decision: walk away and report the location to appropriate authorities, or find a way to document what was down there without risking human entry. I chose documentation, and that choice led to discoveries I'm still trying to explain. We contacted a professional drone operation team, explained the situation, the hazards, the technical requirements. They arrived 2 days later with specialized equipment, cave-rated drones with enhanced lighting systems, thermal imaging, and crucially, signal relay technology designed for underground operation. The lead operator, I'll call him James, he'd done cave mapping before, including several abandoned mine systems. He understood the challenges: signal degradation, magnetic interference from mineral deposits, the need for systematic documentation. We staged at the entrance. James configured the drone for cave environment, reduced speed, enhanced collision avoidance, set the camera for low light optimization. The plan was straightforward: descend, document the shaft structure, map any branching passages, return. At least that's what we expected. James launched the drone at 0847 hours. We were watching multiple displays: primary HD feed, FPV view from the drone's perspective, telemetry data showing depth, speed, battery status. The descent was smooth. The shaft continued at that consistent angle. Timber supports appeared every 12 to 15 feet. Some collapsed, some still bearing load. The walls showed tool marks, drill, patterns, evidence of systematic excavation. Depth reading showed 80 feet, then 100. The passage maintained consistent dimensions, approximately 6 feet wide, 7 feet high. Enough clearance for the drone with margin for safe operation. James was narrating what he observed: rock composition changes, areas where the cinnabar deposits were particularly dense, sections where the shaft had partially collapsed but remained passable. At 137 feet depth, the signal degraded slightly. Expected, normal for underground operation. James adjusted relay positioning. Signal strength recovered, and then, at 162 feet, everything stopped. Complete signal loss. Not degradation, not interference. Complete blackout. The HD feed went to static. The FPV view disappeared. Telemetry data froze. Control inputs showed no response. James immediately attempted recovery protocols, switched frequencies, attempted automatic return-to-home activation, tried manual override commands. Nothing. The drone had effectively vanished. Now, signal loss happens in cave environments. Mineral interference, unexpected rock composition, signal shadows from complex geometry. But this was different. James had worked in conditions far more challenging: deeper caves, more complex mineral profiles. He'd maintained control in environments that should theoretically have been impossible for drone operation. This loss was instantaneous. Not gradual degradation you'd expect from environmental interference. One moment we had full control, clear telemetry. The next moment, nothing. We waited, hoping for automatic return. Drones are programmed to surface if they lose signal beyond certain parameters. We gave it 20 minutes, standard recovery time. The drone did not return. James made the decision to abort. Too risky to send another drone without understanding what caused the failure. We'd lost expensive equipment. But more concerning, We'd lost it in a way that didn't match any technical explanation he could provide. He stated, and I'm quoting him directly, "In 15 years operating drones in cave systems, I have never experienced instantaneous total failure like that. Not from environmental factors, not from equipment malfunction. Something actively interrupted every system simultaneously. We packed the equipment, prepared to leave, and that's when James's backup receiver registered something, a signal, faint, not from inside the shaft, from a completely different direction. The signal was coming from the opposite ridge, approximately 400 meters from the mineshaft entrance, through solid rock, at an elevation roughly equivalent to where we'd lost contact. That should have been impossible. For the drone to reach that location, it would have needed to navigate an underground passage system we had no knowledge of, in complete signal blackout, while maintaining enough power to transmit once it emerged. James triangulated the signal. It was definitely our drone. The telemetry signature was unmistakable, but it was positioned in a location that, according to our geological surveys, according to topographic mapping, shouldn't have had any connection to the mineshaft we'd been exploring. We hiked to the signal location, took us 90 minutes through difficult terrain, and we found the opening, another entrance, much smaller, maybe 3 feet in diameter, partially obscured by vegetation and fallen timber. You wouldn't find it unless you were specifically looking, or unless you were tracking a lost drone's emergency signal. James deployed his backup drone, smaller unit, less sophisticated but adequate for basic reconnaissance. This time he was extremely cautious. Slow penetration, constant monitoring, ready to abort at any indication of the signal problems we'd experienced. The smaller entrance connected to a passage, natural cave formation, not mined. The walls showed water erosion patterns, limestone dissolution characteristics. This was ancient cave system, not 1800s. Mining operation. 50 feet in, the passage intersected our lost drone. It was resting on the cave floor, undamaged, still powered. The signal loss had been complete enough that it had entered emergency land and wait protocol. James recovered it, downloaded the data, and what we found in that footage, that's when this investigation transformed from technical failure analysis to something else entirely. The drone had continued operating in the mineshaft after signal loss for another 212 feet of descent. The cameras had recorded everything, even though we couldn't see it in real time. At approximately 370 feet depth, the mineshaft had intersected a natural cave system. The worked passage opened into a much larger chamber, and from that chamber, multiple tunnels branched in different directions. The drone, following its programming to seek signal, had entered the western passage. That tunnel had angled upward, eventually emerging at the location where we'd found it. But here's what made us continue the investigation. In that main chamber, where the mineshaft met the cave system, the cameras had captured something, evidence of passage, recent passage. Through that tunnel network, I need to describe what the footage showed. And I need you to understand that what I'm about to state, this contradicts basic assumptions about cave ecology. In the main chamber, at a depth of approximately 370 feet below surface, with zero natural light penetration, the drone's enhanced lighting revealed vegetation, not moss, not fungus, not cave-adapted species that can exist in absolute darkness. This was green plant material, leaves, small branches, fern fronds, the kind of vegetation you'd find on a forest floor, transported underground. The material was arranged, not scattered randomly, not distributed in a pattern consistent with water transport or animal dragging. It was placed, concentrated in specific areas of the chamber, creating what appeared to be, and I'm choosing this word carefully, bedding, multiple sites, each consisting of layered plant material, compressed from weight. The vegetation showed various stages of decay, some relatively fresh, some older and decomposed, suggesting repeated use over extended time period. Our team biologist examined the footage frame by frame. Her analysis concluded the plant species were all surface vegetation, common to Oregon forests at that elevation. The arrangement was inconsistent with natural cave processes, and the pattern suggested she used the term nesting behavior. Now, animals create beds, bears will gather material, many mammals create sleeping sites, but we're talking about 370 feet underground, in a chamber that requires navigating either a hazardous mineshaft or complex cave passages to access. What would bring surface vegetation that deep into a cave system? What would arrange it in multiple distinct bedding sites? What would return repeatedly over time to maintain those sites? The footage showed something else: disturbed rock. In the passages leading from the chamber, stones that had been moved, not by water, not by geological process, but displaced in patterns that suggested passage, large passage, something moving through those tunnels. We made the decision to continue investigation. But with different equipment, we needed physical samples. We needed longer-term monitoring. We needed to understand if whatever was using that chamber was still active. We returned 3 days later with expanded equipment, trail cameras, sample collection tools, and importantly, a team member with wildlife biology training who could conduct proper evidence collection. The challenge was access. The mineshaft remained too hazardous for human entry, but we'd mapped the cave passage from the smaller entrance. That route was navigable, difficult, requiring technical rope work and confined space crawling, but possible. Our biologist, I'll call her Dr. Elena Martinez, she volunteered to make the entry. She'd done cave biology work before, had proper training and equipment, and she understood the scientific value of controlled sample collection. She entered the cave system at 0620 hours. Following the mapped route, it took her 90 minutes to reach the main chamber. Her helmet camera documented everything. The chamber was larger than the drone footage had suggested, maybe 40 feet in diameter, ceiling height varying from 8 to 12 feet, multiple passage exits. We'd only explored one. The bedding sites were exactly as the footage showed. Plant material, deliberately arranged. Dr. Martinez conducted systematic documentation, photographs, measurements, and critically, sample collection. She gathered plant material, using sterile collection protocols. For species identification and age analysis, she documented the arrangement patterns, the compression zones where weight had compacted the vegetation, and then she found the hair. 2 distinct samples, one from a bedding site, caught on a rough rock protrusion, the other near a passage entrance, snagged on a timber beam that partially blocked one of the tunnel exits. The first sample appeared reddish-brown, coarse texture, approximately 4 to 6 inches length. The second was lighter, almost white or very pale gray, similar length and texture. Dr. Martinez collected both using proper forensic technique, sterile bags, documented exact location, photographed in situ before collection. She understood these samples could be, if they were what they appeared to be, significant evidence. Before leaving the chamber, she deployed 2 trail cameras, positioned to monitor the main bedding area and the western passage entrance. Motion-activated, infrared-capable, battery life rated for 60 days, she exited the cave at 1,240 hours. Successful sample collection, camera deployment complete. The hair samples went to a laboratory that specializes in wildlife forensics. We submitted them without context. Just requested species identification and DNA analysis if possible. Results took 3 weeks, and when they came back, the laboratory couldn't provide definitive identification. The lab reported markers consistent with primate characteristics, but not matching any reference samples in their database. Not human, not known ape species. The hair structure was consistent with a large mammal, but the specific characteristics didn't match their reference collections. They requested additional samples for further analysis, and they asked where we'd obtain the material, because in their words, this represents either a contaminated sample or biological material from an unidentified species. We didn't provide location details. We told them we'd attempt to collect additional samples, and we waited for the trail cameras to provide data. 24 days after deployment, we retrieved the cameras. The footage showed something. Before I describe what the cameras captured, I need to tell you about Thomas's encounter, because it occurred during the same time frame. In terrain adjacent to our cave investigation area, Thomas is a local wilderness guide, 30 years experience, knows this territory better than anyone I've worked with. He was conducting a solo navigation training exercise, practice for an upcoming multi-day expedition he was planning. October 19th, approximately 1,430 hours, He was traversing a ridge system, maybe 2 miles from our investigation site. He saw something moving in a clearing below his position. Distance he estimated at 400 yards. Initially identified as bear. Black bear are common in that area. He'd seen dozens. Nothing unusual about the sighting, except this bear wasn't moving like a bear. Thomas watched it through his binoculars. The figure was upright. Not the hunched posture bears adopt when walking on hind legs. This was vertical, balanced, moving with smooth coordination that, according to Thomas, looked nothing like any bear I've observed in 30 years. He activated his phone camera, started recording. The distance was significant. The footage isn't cinematic quality, but it shows what he described, a large, dark figure, moving upright through the clearing, pausing, turning its head, appearing to survey the area, then continuing into the tree line. Thomas stated the head movement was what convinced him this wasn't a bear. The way the figure turned, scanned the surroundings, appeared to be actively observing. Not the random movement of an animal, but purposeful visual assessment. The footage is approximately 90 seconds. The figure is distant, details are limited, but the posture, the movement pattern, the behavior, all of it contradicts bear identification. Thomas reported the sighting. He's not prone to speculation. 30 years guiding means he's seen black bears in every possible context. Close range, distant, various terrain, different seasons. He knows bear behavior, and he stated explicitly that was not a bear. When we compared his sighting location to our cave investigation site, the distance was just under 2 miles. The terrain was contiguous, heavily forested, with multiple ravine systems that could provide concealed travel routes. And when we reviewed the trail camera footage from the cave chamber, the timing aligned. The trail camera in the main chamber activated on October 21st, 0247 hours. Motion detection triggered recording. The footage shows the western passage, infrared illumination, and a figure enters the frame, large, covered in dark hair or fur, moving on 2 legs. The gait is smooth, coordinated. The figure crosses the chamber approximately 15 feet from camera to opposite passage. Time in frame, 8 seconds. The size is difficult to determine precisely without reference points. But comparing to known chamber dimensions, Dr. Martinez estimated height at 7 to 8 feet, broad shoulder width, long arms visible in profile. The figure moves through the chamber without hesitation, suggesting familiarity with the space, knowledge of the layout. This isn't random exploration. This is purposeful travel through known territory. The camera captured 2 more activations that night, 0319 hours and 0503 hours. Same figure, same movement pattern. Using the chamber as a passage route between tunnel systems, but here's what made the footage particularly significant. On the 3rd activation, the figure pauses, turns toward the bedding area, and appears to adjust the plant material. The motion is brief, deliberate, maintaining the bedding structure. That behavior, that maintenance of a prepared rest site, that suggests cognitive complexity beyond basic animal behavior. Now, I want to show you something else. Because Thomas wasn't the only person who captured footage in this area, a wildlife photographer working in the Wasatch Front Range. Different state, different investigation, but relevant to understanding physical capabilities. He was testing a new telescope lens system, designed for extreme distance wildlife photography. He was positioned on a ridge, observing a slope approximately 1 mile distant. Movement caught his attention, something running uphill, through snow, deep snow. He estimated 7 feet depth based on visible vegetation, emergence. He activated his camera, started recording through the telescope. The magnification was significant. He could observe detail at that range. The figure was large, moving upright, running through snow that would immobilize a human. The gait was powerful, coordinated. The speed was, he stated, impossible for a human in those conditions. The footage is remarkable. It shows sustained uphill running through snow that reaches well above what would be knee height on a human. No slowdown, no visible exhaustion, just steady, powerful movement. To test his observation, the photographer returned to that slope when weather permitted, attempted to replicate the movement he'd filmed. In much shallower snow, less than 2 feet depth, he couldn't. The energy expenditure was overwhelming. Within 50 feet, he was exhausted. The figure in his footage had covered several hundred yards, uphill, in snow more than 3 times deeper. That footage, combined with Thomas's observation, combined with our trail camera results, these multiple independent documentations, they paint a consistent picture. The evidence suggests a large bipedal presence may be moving through this wilderness area, something large, bipedal, adapted to mountainous terrain, capable of sustained physical exertion beyond human capacity, and apparently using cave systems for what? Shelter? Travel routes? Seasonal habitat? We needed ground truth. Camera footage provides documentation. But physical evidence, tracks, those provide measurable data. 3 days after retrieving our trail cameras, weather conditions were optimal. Fresh snow overnight, clear morning. We requested helicopter support for aerial survey of the area surrounding our investigation site. The pilot was someone I'd worked with on previous projects, experienced in wilderness aerial survey, good eye for ground features. He understood what we were looking for. We were airborne at 0630 hours. Sunrise was providing optimal lighting. The fresh snow created perfect tracking conditions. Any movement from the previous night would be clearly visible. We found the trackway at 0702 hours. Ridge system approximately 1.5 miles from the cave entrance. The tracks were distinct, large impressions in the snow, following the ridgeline, then descending into a ravine. The pilot positioned for photography. I documented what I could from the helicopter. But aerial photography has limitations. We needed ground verification. We landed, hiked to the trackway location. By the time we reached it, wind had already begun degrading the impressions. Snow was drifting, details were softening, but what remained was sufficient for measurement and documentation. Individual track size, approximately 15 to 17 inches length, 7 to 9 inches width. The variation was due to stride position, some tracks clearer than others. Stride length, consistent at 60 to 72 inches. That's substantial. A 6-foot-tall human male has an average stride length of maybe 30 inches in normal walking. These tracks showed more than double that span. Track pattern. This was interesting. The placement was nearly linear, what trackers call tightrope walking, one foot placed almost directly in front of the other. This creates maximum stability on narrow terrain features, ridge walking, game, trails. Places where balance is critical. It's a gait pattern you see in experienced mountaineers, in animals adapted to steep terrain. But the stride length, the track size, those exceeded human or known animal parameters. We documented everything we could. Photographs, measurements, casting would have been ideal, but the snow conditions weren't suitable. And the degradation from wind was accelerating. By the time we finished documentation, maybe 40 minutes on site, the tracks were noticeably less distinct. Another hour, and they'd be gone. Just wind-smoothed snow with vague depressions. But we had the data, trackway documented, measurements recorded, location verified, and this trackway, this was within the terrain range connecting our cave site, Thomas's sighting location, and the areas where other observations had been reported. These weren't random isolated incidents. This was pattern documentation, multiple evidence types, different collection methods, independent observers, all indicating the same thing. Something large and bipedal was moving through this wilderness area. I want to add historical context, because our investigation, our evidence collection, this isn't occurring in a vacuum. There's precedent. Documentation from credible observers under circumstances that eliminate hoax possibility. 1994, Alaska. I received this account from a retired Special Operations team member, someone whose career required reliable observation skills, someone trained to document and report accurately under challenging conditions. His team was conducting cold weather training, remote wilderness, standard military preparation for Arctic operations. They were establishing a camp, routine site preparation. One team member noticed tracks, large tracks, in snow, leading from tree line to a frozen stream, then disappearing into forest on the opposite bank. The team investigated. Standard protocol. Unknown tracks near your camp. You investigate. The tracks were, according to their measurements, 18 inches in length, 5-foot stride spacing. The depth of impression suggested significant weight, and the track pattern suggested bipedal locomotion. They followed the trackway for approximately 1 mile. The tracks showed consistent characteristics: large, bipedal, demonstrating terrain awareness. The path chosen avoided difficult ground, stayed to easier routes, showed what they interpreted as decision-making about travel efficiency. They documented everything: photographs, measurements, sketches, standard intelligence gathering procedure. These weren't cryptozoology enthusiasts. These were professional military personnel trained in observation and reporting. Their initial estimates, based on track size and stride length, suggested a bipedal creature approximately 9 feet tall, weight range 500 to 700 pounds, capable of sustained travel through difficult terrain and winter conditions. Now, why do I consider this account relevant? Because these were trained observers, people whose careers demanded accurate reporting. They had no incentive to fabricate, no expectation. This would become public record, just internal military documentation, and their description matches parameters we're documenting 30 years later. Different location, different observers, same basic characteristics: large, bipedal, mountain-adapted, demonstrating intelligent route selection. This isn't new phenomenon suddenly appearing. This is ongoing presence, documented across decades, by independent observers with no connection to each other. I need to tell you about the night of October 28th, because that's when this investigation moved from documentation collection to direct experience. We were camped at a staging site approximately 1 mile from the cave entrance, standard base camp for our ongoing monitoring operations. 4 people, proper equipment, nothing unusual about the setup. Weather was clear, temperature around 38 degrees Fahrenheit, no wind, quiet conditions. At 2,147 hours, we heard vocalization: not wolf, not coyote, not elk. I've spent enough time in wilderness to recognize common animal sounds. This was different, deep, resonant, starting as a low tone and rising to what I'd describe as a howl, but not canine. The quality was wrong. The timbre was wrong. Duration was extended, maybe 8 to 10 seconds per vocalization, and it was close. Maybe 200 yards based on volume and clarity. We went quiet, listening. The vocalization repeated. Same pattern, same duration. From a different direction, maybe 150 yards. Moving. Over the next 40 minutes, we heard that sound from 5 different positions around our camp. The sounds appeared to circle the camp, never approaching directly, maintaining distance, but clearly aware of our presence, clearly observing. At 2,236 hours, we heard wood breaking, not a branch, a tree, substantial diameter based on the sound, snapping, followed by the crash of it falling, distance maybe 120 yards, in the direction of the most recent vocalization. No wind, no storm, no explanation for why a tree would suddenly break and fall, except deliberate action. The circling behavior continued. Vocalizations from different positions. No visual contact, nothing entered our light perimeter, but the presence was. It was persistent, methodical, like we were being assessed. At 01:12 hours, everything stopped. The vocalizations ceased, the sense of presence gone. Just normal night sounds resuming: insects, small mammals, the usual nocturnal activity. We maintained watch. No further incidents. Morning came. We investigated the area where we'd heard the tree break. We found it, Douglas fir, approximately 8 inches diameter, broken 4 feet above ground level. Not cut, not diseased, just snapped. The break was fresh. The tree had fallen exactly when we heard the sound. The force required to break a tree that size, that substantial. You don't accidentally snap 8-inch diameter healthy trees. And the circling behavior. The vocalizations from multiple positions, that suggested either multiple individuals coordinating or single individual moving with deliberate intent to monitor from various angles. What we experienced that night, this behavior did not resemble typical wildlife activity. That was purposeful, intelligent, observational behavior. Something knew we were there. Something was interested enough to spend over an hour circling our position, close enough to observe, far enough to remain concealed, breaking a tree, perhaps as demonstration, as warning. as communication? Here's something that bothered me throughout this investigation. And I only learned about it after most of our fieldwork was complete. A colleague showed me a topographic map, standard military survival school training material, used at a facility where military personnel are taught wilderness survival and evasion techniques. The map covers terrain in the Pacific Northwest, areas where survival training exercises are conducted, remote wilderness, difficult terrain, areas where students are taught to navigate without equipment, to survive without support. On this official map, among the standard topographic features, elevation lines, water sources, terrain markings, there's an illustration, a Sasquatch, specifically labeled, placed in a region of particularly remote and difficult terrain. Now, this could be humor. Military training materials sometimes include unofficial additions, inside jokes, Easter eggs for attentive students, and this is what concerns me, it could represent institutional knowledge. If military survival instructors have had enough experience in certain areas, enough observations, enough encounters, would they include that information in training materials, even unofficially? Think about what survival training requires. You're teaching people to navigate, to find shelter, to avoid hazards. If instructors consistently heard reports from training areas, if they had their own observations, would they, unofficially, include that on training maps? I don't know the answer. I don't know if that map represents humor or experience, but it exists in official training materials, and it suggests that, at least in some contexts, people with extensive wilderness experience, people whose jobs require accurate environmental assessment, they're acknowledging something in those remote areas. This connects to something Dr. Martinez said during our investigation. She mentioned that her graduate work included cave ecology studies, and she'd heard, unofficially, from senior researchers, stories about discoveries that didn't get published, observations that remained in field notes but never made it to academic literature, not because the observations were invalid, but because they didn't fit into acceptable research frameworks, because publishing them would invite professional skepticism, because sometimes staying credible means staying silent about observations you can't explain. How much documentation exists in military reports, in forestry records, in unpublished research notes that describes encounters, observations, evidence, but never enters public record? So here's what we documented over a 4-month investigation period: underground chamber at 370 feet depth, showing evidence of repeated use. The footage appears to show the figure interacting with the bedding material, prepared rest areas, in a location that required navigating either hazardous mineshaft or complex cave. Air samples that laboratory analysis characterized as primate, but couldn't match to known species, suggesting either contamination or biological material from something not in reference databases. Trail camera footage showing large bipedal figure, using the chamber as passage route, demonstrating familiarity with the space, engaging in maintenance behavior of bedding areas. Multiple independent sightings, Thomas's observation, the Wasatch Front telescope footage, showing similar physical characteristics, similar locomotion patterns, similar terrain adaptation. Trackway documentation, large bipedal tracks, extended stride length, terrain-adapted gait pattern, measurements exceeding known animal or human parameters. Historical military account, trained observers. Similar characteristics documented 3 decades earlier. Different location, consistent description, direct nighttime encounter, circling behavior, vocalizations, tree breaking, demonstrating sustained interest in our camp, intelligence in approach and observation, and underlying all of this, questions about institutional knowledge, about what's documented but not published, about observations that exist in private records but not public literature. What does this evidence suggest? This could suggest the possibility of a sustained presence. Because what we documented isn't single anomaly, this is pattern, repeated behavior, maintained habitat sites, evidence of ongoing presence across seasons and years. It suggests underground habitat usage, cave systems providing shelter, temperature regulation, concealment from surface observation, access routes through terrain that appears impassable from topside. It suggests snow adaptation, physical capability to move through deep snow, to navigate mountainous terrain in winter conditions, to maintain activity in environments that would immobilize most large mammals. It suggests long-term human avoidance, sophisticated understanding of when humans are present, ability to monitor human activity, capability to remain concealed despite operating in terrain that humans also utilize. This could suggest the possibility of a sustained presence, because what we documented isn't single anomaly. This is pattern, repeated behavior, maintained habitat sites, evidence of ongoing presence across seasons and years. Now I return to the question I started with. The decision to document rather than ignore, was that the right choice? We didn't prove species' existence. We collected evidence. We conducted systematic investigation. We applied scientific methodology where possible. We documented what we observed, but we didn't achieve definitive proof. We didn't capture clear photographic documentation at close range. We didn't collect remains. We didn't bring back the kind of physical evidence that would satisfy scientific peer review. What we have is what I've presented here. Multiple evidence types, independent observations, documented patterns, and questions that don't have comfortable answers. The cave system remains. The bedding sites remain. Trail cameras continue monitoring. And something, whether it fits our biological categories or not, something continues using that underground habitat. I don't know what definitive proof would look like in this context. I don't know what evidence threshold would satisfy rigorous scientific standards while remaining ethically achievable. What I do know is that remote wilderness, particularly cave systems, particularly in areas with complex terrain and limited human access, these environments could support populations of large mammals. We haven't, not through impossibility, but through intelligence, through learned avoidance behavior, through utilization of habitat types we don't routinely investigate. The question isn't, how could something remain undocumented in modern times? The question is, how hard are we actually looking? And in how many truly remote wilderness areas have we conducted systematic underground habitat surveys? This investigation, this documentation, it represents 4 months of focused effort, multiple researchers, significant equipment, and we barely scratched the surface of one cave system in one mountain range. How many similar systems exist? How many have cave formations connecting to surface openings in ways that provide concealed access? How many remain completely unexplored because the access requirements are too technical, too dangerous, too expensive for routine survey? I started this investigation because of a drone failure that didn't match technical explanation. I'm ending it with more questions than answers, with evidence that suggests something significant, but doesn't provide definitive conclusions. And maybe that's appropriate. Maybe the nature of investigating what might be the world's most successful human avoidance specialist. Maybe that necessarily means ambiguous results, suggestive evidence, questions that demand continued investigation. The underground chamber remains monitored, the cave system remains accessible, and something continues using those passages for purposes we can only infer from evidence left behind. This documentation is complete, this testimony is recorded, but the investigation, in a broader sense, that continues.